Formula One is in the US of A for the United States Grand Prix in Austin, Texas. They are racing at the Circuit of the Americas, which is a 3.5-mile long track, which is home to some squiggly S sections as well as slower chicanes and fast straights. It is a sprint weekend, so the United States fans were able to see a lot of racing this weekend, and that was home to a lot of tire degradation coming into the picture, as well as track limits rearing its ugly head once again, and many strategies were available to the drivers, that being a 1 or 2 stop strategy, which tensions flared between driver and strategists. Tune in as I discuss the sprint race, qualifying, the Grand Prix, and more. Hey guys, hope you're having a great weekend. I know I am. It's nice to get back in front of the camera once again, and of course it's a home race for me in the United States, so that 2 p.m. start hits differently, that's for sure. Been pretty busy this past couple weeks, and so it was nice to have that week off, but I'm looking forward to kind of closing out the last couple weeks of the Formula One season. But as I mentioned, this was a action-packed weekend. We did have a sprint race, and so I'll start with qualifying. Some of the notable things with qualifying were Alonso getting bumped out in Q3 for the first time this season, which was a little bit abnormal. We know Aston Martin has been struggling, but that just kind of was the start of their poor weekend this weekend. Next, Max getting kind of a little bit of a holdup with him and Perez in that qualifying session, and he made that known over the radio, but he ended up getting kind of hosed there, and then on top of that, track limits reared its ugly head once again, and Max was on pole for qualifying until he exceeded track limits, and they took away his fastest time, and thus Leclerc got bumped up and was the pole sitter for the Grand Prix this weekend. Now let's get into the sprint race. And so there was like a sprint shootout thing, and truthfully, I think there should just be the one qualifying session, give the drivers an extra practice session, and the qualifying should either be for both races, or the sprint race results should be the starting order for the actual race as they have done in years past. What do you guys think about that though? Anyways, in the sprint, Russell had some track limit issues. Notably, Stroll retired the car, which again, just the upgrade that Aston Martin had was not working this weekend. It did not really do very well, and they realized that right after the sprint race. And then Max really just dominated the sprint race. There wasn't all that much there. I think the sprint race really showed us that Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren were really going to be closer than they may have been in the prior weeks. And I feel like the sprint race was pretty much what the actual race ended up being. But let's go ahead and get into the actual race now. And before I do, I want to touch on a couple pre-race things. Haas was making some adjustments to their car, and thus they were going to be starting in the pits, both Magnussen and Hülkenberg, and then also Stroll and Alonso are going to be starting in the pits as well. As I mentioned, they were struggling. The sprint race showed them that, and so Alonso is going to be running the floor of their old car, and Stroll is going to be running the floor of their newer upgraded car. And so we'll see how that turns out for them. And so now, without further ado, let's get into the Grand Prix. So in the start of the race, it was relatively drama-free. Lando Norris was able to pull away quite early and was able to take off and get several second lead on the rest of the field. In this, we saw Max Verstappen starting 6th, and so he had some ground to make up, as well as Sergio Perez. Really, in this early part of the race, the most notable thing would be Piastri getting into Ocon. And in this, there was kind of a little puff of smoke, and we knew something happened, but it didn't take it until a couple lap or so after that contact, we saw Ocon having tremendous issues and ended up having to retire his car. A couple laps after that, we saw Piastri having some issues as well, radiator issues, which all root back to the side pod issue that Ocon had as well. And so they both end up retiring the car, and this is a really big blow to McLaren because they're trying to chase the points and trying to beat Aston Martin, maybe catch Ferrari and friends in the point standings. And so it's tough when you only got one car going for points. But after we kind of work our way through the first couple of laps, we get to around lap 17, and This really brings in that first pit sequence, and I think when we talk about pit sequences, it's important to touch on this whole pit thing as a whole and the whole strategy as a whole. And so it's always nice when we run on a Grand Prix where strategy can come into play. Having different strategies allows for some unpredictability in that a driver that maybe doesn't have the best car is able to gain some positions by changing things up and taking a risk. And in this, the risk was doing a one-stop strategy. Everyone did a two-stop strategy, and everybody knew the tire degradation was going to be a large issue. And so right off the bat, a lot of people were questioning why were people going with a one-stop strategy and thought it was quite unrealistic. And I wouldn't say those people were wrong by any means. And so in this, we saw the Mercedes cats both starting on a one-stop strategy, and then we also saw Leclerc go on a one-stop strategy, Sainz did a two-stop strategy, and then we also saw Ricciardo on a one-stop strategy. And after that first stint, people were made aware, well, all weekend, people knew that the mediums were going to be the best tire, and the tire deg was much worse than maybe people had anticipated. And even though they had the sprint race to tell them this, even though they maybe had the practice session earlier to tell them this, they still went for the one stop. And what ended up happening is both of the Mercedes cats were like, yeah, this is impossible. This is really hard. And I mean, Russell didn't say that, but Hamilton made that known. And so they ended up doing a offset. I mean, offset meaning what? You were off on your strategy call, so you're going to change it, mid-race, and they ended up going like 20 or over 20 laps on that first stint, and then they changed it up. And I think it might have really hurt them by having to change that mid-race. If they would have maybe tried to get that first stint a little bit more of a push instead of just saving tires, that might have helped out a little bit. But we'll never know on that side of things, because many people were saying that Hamilton had a car that could have beat Verstappen, and later down the line, we'll see the implications of this. But with that whole strategy coming into play caused some drama. And in that, Leclerc I think he was frustrated because he got on pole, and then he was given a one-stop strategy, which is a strategy for somebody who maybe doesn't have the best car. And so Sainz was on a two-stop strategy, and then later down the race, Sainz is passing up Leclerc. And I feel like Leclerc's like, wait, hold up. Like, why am I in a worse situation than Sainz when I had a better car this weekend, or I qualified better? And in that, he gets kind of frustrated because his team orders him to give Sainz the spot back, and then he gets eaten up by Perez. And so this caused some drama in that Leclerc was like, yo, we got to talk about that after the race. The whole giving Sainz up the position and stuff, because Leclerc was just in tire saving mode, it felt like, and he wasn't able to really push as much as he maybe would have liked to. So maybe just some disgruntled driver drama going on there. But next, let's talk about Max Verstappen. Had some drama this weekend. And so not only did Max not qualify as well as he would have liked to, starting 6th, he was struggling with some braking issues, which he did not struggle with in the sprint race. So he was kind of frustrated over the radio on because of his brakes. And in this, he was frustrated at his strategist for talking to him mid-race during his turns and during his corners. And so he was like, please don't talk to me when I'm braking. And he had to tell him this twice. And I think maybe Max was trying to listen for his brakes and baby his brakes a little bit because he knew it had some sort of issue. He didn't want to end up having to retire his car. And so that makes total sense. And I found it quite comical, though, because he's telling him, don't talk to me during my braking. Don't talk to me during my braking. And his race engineer is just like, understood. So I found that kind of funny, but I felt like in this, Max wasn't able to have maybe his stereotypical dominance as he's had in past weekends. And this really left a window for other drivers to maybe contend. And so really when I look at this race and I try to give my opinion on it, I didn't think there was too much going on excitement-wise. I feel like the main focal point of the race was the strategy on the 1 and 2 stops, trying to really see how they developed and seeing if that would help the Mercedes until they went to the offset strategy, and then seeing how Leclerc would show with that. But also early on, Lando had the lead, and then he ended up giving the lead up around lap 28. Max gets the lead, and he never really looks back. But, you start to hope a little bit that Lando may be able to catch Max with his braking issues. That's not the case. And then once I understood that was not going to happen, it was really, okay, my eyes were on Hamilton for most of the race, in that he was on this wonked out strategy for a while, kind of handling his car and his tires, and then he's able to gain some positions, ends up passing Lando quite easily. And I feel like if we had a couple more laps, he might have been able to catch Lewis, might have been able to catch Verstappen. Verstappen was visibly struggling with his car, and it seemed like Hamilton was running quite well towards the end of the race. And so we'll never know how that all panned out. And maybe people were saying on Twitter that if they didn't start with that one-stop strategy, he might have had him. I don't know if you could say that, but nonetheless, I found that kind of cool to just be able to follow that storyline throughout the race. But otherwise, I didn't think it yielded too much raciness throughout the circuit. But other than that, I want to touch on the results. And as I'm doing that, I'll touch on a couple other opinions I had for the race. Breaking news in the scene of Formula One. I've already filmed the whole video. I'm editing the video. I look on Twitter, and there is news of Hamilton and Leclerc both being disqualified. And so I'm like, whatever, I'll just continue editing the video and see what happens. And lo and behold, Formula One, or the FIA, has decided to disqualify Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton for plank wear irregularities. Essentially, on the floor of the car, there's this wooden plank, and if the wear is not up to par, or it could indicate that there is a too big of a plank or too small of a plank in that area. And so in this case, there was some irregular wear, and so this completely disqualified the cars. And so up until this point, I've always known that Formula One has very strict regulations, and I'm glad that they are upholding those regulations. It just kind of sucks for me as a viewer, because I got super hyped for Lewis and just how his strategy kind of unfolded, and same with Leclerc, and I feel like they were two of the larger focal points of this race. And now after the fact, you take them out of the picture and you look back at this race, and what do you have? And so that's frustrating as a viewer that this even happened to begin with, but you have to uphold the rules that you set. But anyways, now I am going to refilm the results, and but there was a disqualification, so everybody else is going to get bumped up, I guess, 2 spots from where they were prior. So let's get into the results. Part 2. So I've already filmed this once, and so let me throw the results up on the screen, and let's talk about them. So Max Verstappen gets his 50th win of his career, so props to him. I believe it's his 3rd win consecutively in the United States. Then we have Lando Norris ending up in 2nd place. Lewis Hamilton was there prior, and he gets bumped up a spot to 2nd. So props to Lando, finishing on the podium yet again, just not able to get that win he so covets. Then we have Carlos Sainz in 3rd place, Sergio Perez ending up in 4th place, and then we have George Russell in 5th, Pierre Gasly in 6th. Really, with George Russell, earlier on in the race, they asked consecutively, him and Hamilton, hey, can you do 5 more laps in the tires? Lewis said, no way, I'm struggling really hard on these. And then Russell said, yeah, I could do 5 laps, no problem. And so for me, I'm just like, in the beginning of the race, I always thought that Russell was going to be able to handle this race a little bit better, and lo and behold, Lewis ends up getting ahead of them on that. But then we see Lance getting up into 7th place despite Fernando's struggles. Lance ends up in 7th. Maybe they end up going with Lance's version of the floor model. They probably will at this point. Then we have Yuki Tsunoda getting 8th, getting into the points, as well as the fastest lap. And I do have a little gripe with this whole fastest lap thing, because I feel like it's very gimmicky. By no means is Yuki Tsunoda the fastest car on the grid. He just so happened to get lucky and have the time necessary, the time allotment between him and the person ahead of him to be able, and behind him rather, to be able to pit, throw on new tires, get back out and post a fast lap. And I feel like it's just consecutively that. It's not, seldom is it the fastest person on the grid, who gets 1st place, 2nd place, 3rd place, ends up getting this award and getting this extra point. It just seems like it just so happens to fall. If it falls right and the stars align, you could pit real quick, not lose a position, and get the fastest lap and get a point, which I don't like. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. Let me know what you guys think about that. Next, we have Alex Albon in 9th. I believe he sustained a 5-second penalty today due to track limits. Is able to still get points into that. Both Williams end up getting into the points because of both of the disqualifications. And so props to them both getting into the points, 9th and 10th respectively. And when you see Logan, I feel like his goal is to really just buddy up with Albon because he's really trying to prove that he's worthy to be here. Maybe that time is long gone now, but if he can just show that he can keep up with his teammate, that's pretty good on his part. Hulkenberg, again, starting in the pits, ends up getting 11th, just missing out on points. Bottas and Guan Yu buddied up 12th and 13th. Magnussen 14th, and Daniel Ricciardo going for that one-stop strategy. Again, absolute blunder on that side of things, ends up with the 15th spot. Fernando Alonso ends up leaving the race DNFs because of a rear suspension issue, and then Oscar and Ocon both collected each other earlier on with the whole side pod issue with Ocon, and I believe Oscar sustained some sort of issue with his radiator, stemming back to that issue with Ocon. And then Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc both get disqualified after the fact, after the race, due to this plank wear irregularity. But nonetheless, what did you guys think of the race? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you guys like the video and you want to see more motorsports content, I'll be posting a bunch of videos throughout the off season and throughout the rest of the Formula One season. So go ahead and like the video and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more. And again, thanks for watching, thanks for tuning in, thanks for hanging out, and I hope you guys have a great week. Peace.